So the legal system was designed to favor big money. We know that because poor people did not get a chance to create this system. It was the people with the wealth and the influence that created the current legal system that we have. And guess what? That legal system does not work on behalf most of the time of poor people or black people or brown people. No, it doesn't work. It works for the ultra wealthy most of the time. So Jake Tapper of CNN State of the Union recently wrote an article in The Atlantic which specifically addresses the failures of the Sixth Amendment. And I want to shout out Jake for writing this story and following this, and so glad that he did, and hopefully this will help other people. So we're putting this up, we see this. This is not justice. A Philadelphia teenager and the empty promise of the Sixth Amendment by Jake Tapper. So this starts in Philadelphia with a young man named C.J. Rice and a chance encounter with Jake Tapper's father, Dr. Ted Tapper. He is a pediatrician. Take a look at this.
This is a case of C.J. Rice, who's been locked up for more than a decade for a crime Dr. Tapper believes he did not commit. In an Atlantic article that came out today, Tapper outlines Rice's case. At 17 years old, back in 2011, Rice was shot while riding his bike in Philadelphia. Rice believes it was a result of mistaken identity. Rice went to Dr. Tapper for follow-up care in September 2011. He had received more than 24 staples, fractured his pelvis, and lost muscle strength. Dr. Tapper says Rice could barely walk and was in a lot of pain.
Now, it's important to keep CJ's injuries in your mind as you watch this next clip.
Less than a week later, the teenager was arrested for a shooting in South Philadelphia that injured 4 people, including a 6-year-old girl. Rice and a friend were charged in what police saw as a possible retaliation crime. They were both tried. Rice's friend was acquitted, but he was convicted of attempted murder. According to Tapper's reporting in The Atlantic, there was never any physical evidence connecting Rice to the crime. Eyewitness testimony was questionable at best, and there were serious issues with his legal representation. Dr. Tapper has also raised questions about Rice's physical ability to carry out the shooting and flee the scene while still recovering from his injuries.
Now, sadly, Rice's experience is all too familiar. This is not an outlier. This happens, unfortunately, regularly. So nationally, 69% of DNA exonerations, that's 252 out of 367 cases, have involved eyewitness misidentification, making it the leading contributing cause of these wrongful convictions. This is coming from the Innocence Project. Jay?
It's quite obviously an illustration of what's wrong with our judicial system. It's what people always complain about, is when we talk about how it's systematically racist, biased. If it's based on people's eyewitnesses' accounts that many times are wrong, or also based on whether or not someone gets a competent attorney that many folks can't afford, then it leans on whether or not they're found guilty or not guilty of things, or whether or not the prosecutors, who we've seen in many cases, openly and knowingly skew evidence, ignore other things, actually try to just to get this one guy, or in this particular case, this one kid, in jail based off of nothing. It's based off getting that conviction, because if you get enough convictions, then your career takes off. If your career takes off, you make more money. If you make more money, then you can maybe transition to other things. Maybe you want to be a politician one day, and you go, the whole time I was practicing law and I was a prosecutor for 25 years, I convicted so many people. I'm tough on crime. How much do we hear that as we're going through these midterm elections now from many politicians, talking about how they're tough on crime, law and order? We have to make sure we put the bad guys away. But at the end of all of this, as we're seeing the incompetence with his counsel, the lack of asking anyone else what happened or seeing if this makes any sense. If you watch the first 48, you could see, where's the investigation on this? Because this doesn't make any sense. Just television types of things like this. But in real life, we don't have time for that, apparently. And you'll see people like CJ ending up in prison, facing these types of prison sentences, and it doesn't make much sense, because we just don't care. So do we want crime off the streets, or do we just want to put people in jail? for finding that it's somewhere in the middle.
It's really, really sad. And just, as we're wrapping up this story, Rice's mother, Crystal Cooper, she tried very hard to help her son, but our broken legal system reared its ugly head. Let's put this up again, more from Jake's article. Outside the station, she called a former colleague, Sanjay Weaver, then working as a defense attorney. As Cooper listened on the speakerphone, Weaver cautioned that Rice should say nothing to the police without her present. She promised to hurry over. But for whatever reason, Weaver failed to show up. Cooper lacked the money to make bail for Rice, so he would remain confined while awaiting trial like any other criminal defendant without resources. Rice would not go on trial for more than a year. So on top of being arrested without any physical evidence, Rice's Sixth Amendment rights were violated. Let me remind you, we're gonna put this up. Let us remind you of what that amendment says. Guarantees that rights of criminal defendants, including the right to a public trial without unnecessary delay, the right to a lawyer, the right to an impartial jury, and the right to know who your accusers are and the nature of the charges and evidence against you. That was denied. None of those things happened for Rice. Weaver would eventually represent Rice as a public attorney assigned by the court. Really, really, really a sad story. And again, this is not rare, this is commonplace. We have a legal system in the United States of America that is broken. It is actually working, let me back up. It's working as it was designed, which is to work against the poor, the working poor and the barely middle class. And if you are black or brown, forget about it. We have to fix this system from the streets to the courts. Because this is not just about policing in America, this is about a broken system that must be fixed, must be changed. Because a lot of activists on that side, Jay, would say, no, forget it, it ain't broken. It needs to be reimagined. We need to do a new thing. Speaking of new things, so I want you to follow this. Again, thank you, Jake Tapper, for this incredible story about CJ Rice. And hopefully this story will help others